Flames leaped and danced, painting the night sky an angry orange. My prized tractor, a beautiful, beastly machine I called Old Betsy, was a roaring inferno. Heat washed over me, stinging my eyes, but it wasn't the heat that brought tears, it was the cold, hard realization of why this was happening. Just hours earlier, a woman with a smile as sweet as poison ivy had stood on my porch, her voice dripping with fake concern, warning me about consequences for not joining the HOA. Now, as sirens wailed in the distance, I knew exactly what she meant. What she didn't know, however, was that the person she just messed with was none other than the city's lead arson investigator, a man who knew fire like the back of his hand and had a very particular set of skills for finding out who started them. It all began innocently enough, just a few months ago, when I moved into the quiet, tree-lined community of Oakhaven. My name is Alex, and after years of fighting wildfires and investigating suspicious blazes across the state, I was looking for a peaceful place to settle down, maybe do a little gardening, and enjoy the simple life. Oakhaven seemed perfect. The houses were well kept, the lawns manicured, and the air hummed with a sleepy, suburban calm. I found a lovely little ranch house with a spacious backyard, ideal for my modest vegetable patch and, of course, Old Betsy, my trusty compact tractor that made light work of tilling and hauling. My first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes and getting acquainted with the local hardware store. Neighbors waved as I passed, some even stopping to offer a friendly welcome to the neighborhood. One afternoon, while I was out front, trying to coax a stubborn rose bush into submission, a woman approached my fence. She had a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a perpetually pursed mouth that suggested she was constantly disapproving of something. This was Brenda, and she introduced herself as the president of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association. Brenda was, to put it mildly, intense. She rattled off a list of rules and regulations faster than I could process them, from acceptable fence heights to the precise shade of beige allowed for mailboxes. She emphasized, several times, the importance of joining the HOA. "It's how we maintain the integrity and value of our community, Alex," she'd chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I, being new and still a bit disoriented from the move, politely listened, promising to look over the mountain of paperwork she handed me. The paperwork sat on my kitchen counter for a week, then two. I was busy, genuinely busy, with work. My new desk job at the city fire department involved a lot of data analysis and report writing, a stark contrast to my previous, more hands-on role. Besides, I'd always been a bit wary of HOAs. My cousin once told me a horror story about his HOA fining him for having a slightly overgrown dandelion. I figured I'd get around to it eventually, but it wasn't a top priority. Brenda, however, had different ideas about priorities. She started showing up. At first, it was subtle. A note tucked under my doormat about a loose shingle I hadn't noticed. Then, a flyer in my mailbox reminding me of the upcoming HOA meeting, circled in bright red ink. One Tuesday morning, I found a printout of the HOA bylaws taped to my front door, specifically highlighting the section about maintaining aesthetic standards. My vegetable patch, which I thought was rather charming, suddenly felt like a rebellious act. Things escalated. Brenda began to casually drop by when I was outside, ostensibly to chat, but always steering the conversation back to the HOA. "Lovely day for gardening, Alex. You know, our community garden program is a wonderful way to connect with neighbors. Of course, you'd need to be an HOA member to participate. Or, your lawn is looking quite green. We have a fantastic bulk discount on fertilizer for our members." It was like a constant, polite pressure campaign. My initial amusement slowly morphed into mild irritation. One afternoon, I was moving a rather large pile of compost with Old Betsy, my tractor humming contentedly. Brenda appeared at the edge of my property, arms crossed. "Alex," she began, her voice a little sharper than usual, "we've noticed your tractor. While we appreciate your efforts to maintain your property, such equipment can be an eyesore, especially if not properly stored. I explained that old Betsy was essential for my gardening and was always parked neatly in the back, out of sight. She just nodded, her lips forming a thin line. The very next day, I received an official-looking letter from the HOA. It was a courtesy notice about unapproved outdoor equipment and potential property devaluation due to unsightly implements. It strongly recommended I join the HOA to understand and comply with community guidelines. It felt less like a courtesy and more like a veiled threat. I decided it was time to push back, gently. I called the number on the letter, reaching Brenda directly. I explained that I understood the need for community standards but felt the HOA was being a bit overly particular about my tractor, which was a piece of farm equipment, not an abandoned car. I also mentioned that I was still weighing my options about joining. Brenda's tone shifted instantly. The sweet, cloying facade dropped, revealing an icy edge. "Alex," she said, her voice now dangerously low, "this community thrives on cooperation. We expect our residents to contribute. Those who choose not to participate often find themselves isolated and facing unforeseen difficulties." I tried to interject, but she cut me off. "Just think about it, Alex. You wouldn't want anything regrettable to happen, would you?" There was a long, uncomfortable silence. I didn't respond, and she hung up. A chill ran down my spine. The conversation left a bad taste in my mouth, a lingering sense of unease. I tried to dismiss it as an overzealous HOA president, but the veiled threat, the unforeseen difficulties, stuck with me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Later that evening, after the sun had set and the stars began to twinkle, I went outside to cover old Betsy with a tarp. The air was still and quiet, a perfect summer night. As I walked back towards the house, a faint smell tickled my nose. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but distinct, a metallic, gassy odor. I sniffed the air, trying to pinpoint it. It seemed to be coming from the direction of my garage, where old Betsy was parked. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my own heightened senses from years of dealing with hazardous materials. Maybe a bit of fuel had spilled when I filled the tank earlier. I went inside, the strange odor quickly forgotten in the comfort of my home. I was just drifting off to sleep when a harsh, orange glow flickered through my bedroom window. My eyes snapped open. The light grew brighter, pulsating. A terrible, acrid smell began to seep into the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. I threw off the covers and raced to the window. What I saw sent a jolt of pure dread through me. There, in my backyard, old Betsy was engulfed in a raging inferno, the flames devouring her metal shell with terrifying speed. The heat was so intense I could feel it through the glass. And then, as I watched in horror, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound from the bushes at the edge of my property, a soft, rustling movement, as if someone was quickly slipping away into the darkness. The roar of the flames was deafening, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. My mind, trained to remain calm in the face of disaster, raced through a checklist: proximity to the house, potential for spread, safety of any nearby structures. But beneath the professional assessment, a raw, hot anger simmered. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. That faint smell of gas, the rustling in the bushes, Brenda's chilling words, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Someone, likely Brenda herself or someone she put up to it, had set old Betsy on fire. The irony wasn't lost on me. The city's fire marshal, whose job was to protect people from such acts, was now a victim himself. The fire department arrived quickly, their flashing lights painting my quiet street in a macabre disco of red and blue. I watched, a knot in my stomach, as they doused the remains of old Betsy. The once sturdy tractor was now a charred, twisted wreck, a testament to someone's malicious intent. Captain Miller, a grizzled veteran I'd worked with on countless investigations, approached me, his face etched with concern. "Alex, what happened here? Looks like a total loss." I kept my voice even, professional. "I'm not sure, Captain. Woke up to the smell of smoke, saw the flames. It escalated fast." I deliberately omitted my suspicions. This wasn't the time or place to air my personal theories. As the lead arson investigator, I knew the protocol. The scene needed to be secured, evidence collected, and a formal investigation initiated. I couldn't be both the victim and the investigator in the initial stages without compromising the process. The next few days were a whirlwind of insurance adjusters, police interviews, and the constant, nagging feeling of being watched. I noticed small things: curtains twitching across the street, cars slowing down a little too much as they passed my house. It was a subtle shift, but I felt it. The quiet calm of Oakhaven now felt laced with an unsettling tension. I kept my professional demeanor, but inside, I was fuming. The damage to old Betsy was significant, but it was more than just a financial loss. She was a symbol of my attempt to embrace a simpler, quieter life, and someone had tried to burn that dream to the ground. The thought of Brenda's smug face, her veiled threats, fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. My first step was to discreetly review the fire department's preliminary report on old Betsy. As expected, it listed the cause as undetermined, pending further investigation. This was standard. What wasn't standard, however, was the unusual absence of any significant accelerant residue, at least according to the initial field tests. That struck me as odd. The fire had spread incredibly fast, which usually pointed to something highly flammable. It suggested a more sophisticated accelerant, one designed to burn quickly and leave minimal trace. This was starting to feel less like a random act of vandalism and more like a carefully planned attack. I decided to take a short leave from my regular duties, citing personal reasons. This would give me the space to conduct my own, unofficial investigation without raising eyebrows at work. My focus was Brenda and the HOA. I began to subtly gather information about them. I joined the neighborhood Facebook group, lurking in the shadows, observing the online chatter. It quickly became clear that Brenda was a formidable force, both admired and feared. Posts praising her dedication to community standards were often followed by hushed whispers in the comments about her iron fist and tendency to micromanage every aspect of residents' lives. One afternoon, while walking my non-existent dog, a ruse to observe the neighborhood, I struck up a conversation with an older gentleman named Arthur, who was tending his rose garden a few blocks down. Arthur had lived in Oakhaven for decades and, after a little gentle prodding, proved to be a wealth of information about the HOA and its history. "Oh, Brenda," Arthur sighed, shaking his head. "She means well, I suppose, but she's taken the rules to a whole new level since she became president. Used to be, the HOA was just about keeping the common areas tidy. Now, it's about what color your shutters are and how many lawn gnomes you have." He then recounted tales of Brenda's relentless pursuit of violations, from fining a family for having slightly too bright Christmas lights to demanding a war veteran repaint his mailbox because it was off beige. He mentioned several residents who had moved away, citing the HOA's oppressive atmosphere as a major factor. "She doesn't like anyone who doesn't fall in line," Arthur confided, lowering his voice. "Especially if you don't join her little club." This confirmed my suspicions. Brenda was known for her heavy-handed tactics. But would she resort to arson? It seemed extreme, even for her. Yet, the puzzle pieces were slowly beginning to form a disturbing picture. Days turned into a week. My house still smelled faintly of smoke, a constant reminder. I spent hours online, researching accelerants that leave minimal residue, cross-referencing them with methods used by professional arsonists. I knew I needed more concrete evidence, something that would link Brenda directly to the fire. Then, a minor incident occurred that, at first, seemed insignificant but later proved to be a crucial piece of the puzzle. My mailbox, a simple black box on a wooden post, was suddenly gone. Not knocked over, not vandalized. Just gone. In its place was a neatly typed note, affixed to a small stake in the ground: mailbox does not comply with HOA aesthetic guidelines. A replacement will be installed, and a fee assessed to your account. Welcome to the HOA. The note was signed, the Oakhaven HOA Board. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a mailbox, it was a brazen act of defiance, a clear message that they were watching, that they were in control, and that they would continue to exert their power over me. They had taken my property, without permission, and then had the audacity to bill me for it. It was a petty act, yes, but it was a deliberate violation of my property rights, a further attempt to intimidate me into submission. The anger I felt was no longer simmering, it was boiling. This wasn't just about a tractor anymore. This was about principle, about standing up to a bully who thought they were above the law. As the sun began to set that evening, casting long shadows across my yard, I noticed something else. A small, dark object glinting in the grass near where old Betsy had been parked. It was partially obscured by a patch of scorched earth. My heart pounded as I knelt down, pushing aside the blackened debris. It was a small, silver locket, partially melted, but still recognizable. It was delicate, clearly belonging to a woman, and etched on its surface was a single, stylized B. A cold certainty washed over me. This was a critical piece of evidence. And it pointed directly to Brenda. The B on the locket wasn't just a letter, it was a blaring siren in my mind, a direct link to Brenda. My professional instincts, usually reserved for objective investigations, were now sharply focused by a personal vendetta. This wasn't just about my tractor anymore, it was about proving that Brenda, with her self-righteous authority, was a common criminal. The locket was a shaky piece of evidence on its own, but combined with the threatening phone call and the stolen mailbox, it painted a damning picture. I held the locket tight, its cold metal a stark contrast to the burning rage I felt. I had to proceed carefully, like navigating a minefield, because one wrong move could tip my hand and allow Brenda to cover her tracks. The next few days felt like living in a spy movie, except the stakes were personal and the villain was an HOA president. I put the locket in a secure place, knowing its potential value. My official leave from the fire department continued, giving me ample time to observe and plan. I started taking long walks around the neighborhood, always with a purpose. I wasn't just exercising, I was looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that seemed out of place. I noticed Brenda's house, a meticulously kept colonial, always seemed to have someone coming and going, other HOA board members, landscapers, delivery drivers. She was a busy woman, controlling her domain with an iron fist. My focus turned to the details of the fire itself. I mentally replayed the night old Betsy burned, searching for any detail I might have missed. The rapid spread of the fire, the minimal residue, it still bothered me. Most common accelerants leave a significant footprint. This pointed to something more specialized, something harder to trace. I spent hours in my home office, which was now more of a war room, poring over old case files and scientific papers on less common incendiary devices. I even dusted off my old college textbooks on organic chemistry, looking for clues. The answer was out there, I just had to find it. While my professional brain was working on the science of the fire, my personal side was plotting how to get under Brenda's skin. I needed to rattle her, to make her uncomfortable, perhaps even to make her slip up. The stolen mailbox provided the perfect opportunity. Instead of just replacing it with an HOA-approved one, I decided to make a statement. I went to a local antique store and found an old, ornate cast-iron mailbox. It was heavy, dark, and had intricate carvings of vines and leaves. It was, in short, everything the Oakhaven HOA would hate. It stood out like a rebellious flag in a sea of beige. I installed it firmly in the ground, anchoring it with concrete, a silent defiance against their arbitrary rules. The next morning, I fully expected another nastygram, perhaps even a visit from Brenda herself. What I got instead was a brief, clipped phone call from Brenda. Her voice was tight with suppressed fury. "Alex, your new mailbox is completely unacceptable. It violates Section 3.2 of our aesthetic guidelines. You have 24 hours to replace it with an approved model, or we will take further action." "What further action, Brenda?" I asked, my voice calm, almost bored. "Are you going to send in a team to remove it again? Because if you do, I'll be filing a police report for theft and property damage this time. And I'll be sure to mention the previous disappearance of my old mailbox, and how oddly convenient it was that it vanished right after your threats." There was a stunned silence on the other end. My subtle insinuation about the previous theft, connecting it to her, clearly hit a nerve. She spluttered for a moment, then regained her composure, though her voice was still strained. "That's a ridiculous accusation, Alex. We simply remove non-compliant property. And I'm warning you, this will not stand. You are pushing the boundaries of community patience." She hung up with a sharp click. I smiled. First blood. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A few days later, while continuing my walks, I passed by Brenda's house just as her landscapers were leaving. One of them, a young man named David, looked exhausted. He saw me and, perhaps sensing a kindred spirit who also dealt with Brenda's demanding nature, offered a weary smile. I decided to try my luck. "Tough day?" I asked, leaning against a tree. David nodded. "Tell me about it. Mrs. Sterling is particular. Very particular." He wiped sweat from his brow. "She had us move a whole patch of azaleas 3 times because the shade of pink wasn't harmonious enough with her porch." I chuckled. "Sounds about right. Heard she's a stickler for rules." "Oh, she is," David confirmed. "You wouldn't believe it. The other day, she had us out here late, cleaning up some kind of spill in her backyard. Said it was just some old paint thinner, but man, it smelled different. Real chemical Y. My eyes were watering just being near it. My ears perked up. Chemical Y, huh? What kind of smell?" David frowned, thinking. "Hard to describe. Like, really sharp. And it burned a little when I breathed it in." She was super antsy about it, kept watching us to make sure we got every last drop. Even made us replace a patch of grass where it spilled. Said she didn't want any traces left. A cold jolt went through me. A sharp, chemical white smell, something that burned the eyes, something she was super antsy about hiding, even replacing the grass. This sounded exactly like the characteristics of a highly volatile, fast-evaporating accelerant, one that would leave minimal residue. My mind immediately connected it to the faint smell I'd detected before the fire, and the unusual lack of accelerant residue at old Betsy's scene. "Did you happen to notice where exactly this spill was?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. David pointed vaguely towards the back of Brenda's yard. "Near her little shed. She has all her gardening stuff in there. And a bunch of weird chemicals, judging by the labels I've seen." This was it. This was the lead I needed. Brenda had not only possessed the accelerant, but she had also been desperate to clean up traces of it after the fire at my place. The timing was too perfect, the details too specific. I thanked David, making a mental note to keep an eye on him for future information. My suspicion was no longer just a gut feeling. It was coalescing into a strong, actionable theory. That night, a new extreme event occurred, proving just how desperate Brenda was. I was sitting in my living room, researching local ordinances about property easements and how they related to HOA powers, when my lights flickered violently. Then, the house plunged into darkness. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a power outage, the rest of the street still had lights. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously moved towards the circuit breaker. As I stepped outside to check the main power box near the street, I saw it. The wires leading to my house had been deliberately cut, cleanly severed with precision cutters. And lying on the ground next to the cut wires, almost like a calling card, was a single, perfectly manicured, bright red fingernail. The sight of the severed wires and the bright red fingernail sent a jolt of pure ice through me, swiftly followed by a furious heat. This wasn't petty vandalism. It was a deliberate act, a step up in aggression. The fingernail, so brazenly left behind, was a taunt. It screamed Brenda. My hands clenched into fists. She was escalating, trying to push me, to make me break. What she didn't realize was that every aggressive act she committed just solidified my resolve. She had no idea who she was truly dealing with. The power outage wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a clear message. It also served as an unexpected opportunity. With no electricity, I had no internet, no distractions. My mind, sharp and focused, turned entirely to Brenda. I spent the dark hours of the night reviewing everything I knew, piecing together the timeline. The threats, the stolen mailbox, the tractor fire, the mysterious spill David had mentioned, and now this. Each incident, seemingly minor on its own, formed a clear pattern of harassment and escalation, all designed to make me conform or leave. The next morning, with the power restored, I'd called in a favor with a city electrician, telling him it was a test run for a new security system. I shifted my focus to concrete action. I knew Brenda was meticulous, almost to a fault. That spilled accelerant at her house, the one David described, was my best lead. If I could get a sample of the soil where it had spilled, I could compare it to any microscopic traces left at old Betsy's fire site. It was a long shot, but it was a crucial step in building an irrefutable case. Breaking into Brenda's backyard was out of the question. Not only was it illegal, but it would also instantly tip her off. I needed a legitimate reason to be on her property, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion. My mind raced through possibilities. A package delivery? A lost pet? None felt quite right. Then, an idea sparked. Brenda was obsessed with her garden. I remembered David mentioning her particularity about the harmonious shade of azaleas. This was my opening. I went to a local nursery and bought a small, beautiful azalea plant, a vibrant shade of fuchsia that I knew would clash gloriously with Brenda's carefully curated pastel garden. I also picked up a small, empty soil sample bag, the kind used by forensic teams. The following afternoon, armed with my gift and my hidden sample bag, I walked confidently up to Brenda's front door and rang the bell. She answered, her perfectly coiffed hair and tight smile firmly in place. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the azalea. "Alex," she said, her voice laced with surprise. "What a lovely gesture." Her gaze lingered on the fuchsia petals. I could almost hear her internal monologue screaming, "Unapproved color." "Brenda," I replied, my voice overly cheerful. "I was just thinking about how much you love your garden, and I saw this and thought of you. It's such a striking color, isn't it? I thought it might add a bit of pop to your flower beds." She took the plant, her smile faltering. "It's certainly vibrant. Thank you, Alex. You know," I continued, pressing my advantage, "I was hoping you could give me some advice. My own azaleas aren't doing so well. I've been struggling with the soil quality. Perhaps I could just take a quick look at your soil, for inspiration. Just a tiny sample, to see what yours has that mine doesn't." Brenda hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards her backyard. This was the moment. "Oh, well, my soil is quite unique, Alex. Very specific pH balance." "I'm sure it is," I quickly agreed. "But that's exactly why I need to see it. Just a tiny scoop from your flower bed near the shed, where you keep your gardening supplies. I saw your landscapers working there the other day, and your plants look so healthy. I gestured vaguely towards the shed. Her face went pale. David's mention of the spill near her shed had clearly rattled her. She bit her lip, then forced a brittle laugh. Of course, Alex. Follow me. She led me to the back, chattering about her composting techniques. My eyes scanned the ground near the shed, looking for any discolored patches, any signs of recent disturbance. I spotted it. A small area where the grass seemed slightly less vibrant, a subtle hint of new growth, just as David had described. Brenda, meanwhile, was carefully guiding me away from that spot, towards a different flower bed. Here, Alex, this is an excellent example of our rich soil, she said, gesturing to a patch of petunias. Oh, yes, beautiful, I said, pretending to examine the soil there. But with a quick, practiced movement, I knelt near the new growth area by the shed, feigning a stumble. My hand, holding the small sample bag, quickly scooped a tiny amount of soil from the discolored patch, barely disturbing the surface. Brenda, flustered by my clumsiness, didn't notice. I quickly sealed the bag. Whoops, my apologies, Brenda, I said, standing up smoothly. Must have tripped on a root. But thank you, this sample is perfect. I have a much better idea now. I made my excuses and left, the small bag of dirt a treasure in my pocket. Back at my house, under the cover of darkness, I meticulously prepared the soil sample. I used a small, portable lab kit I kept for emergency field tests, one with more sensitive instruments than the standard fire department issue. My hands, steady from years of precise work, isolated the microscopic traces. What I found was startling. The soil contained minute, yet detectable, traces of a highly volatile, specialized industrial solvent, often used in specific chemical manufacturing processes, a solvent that, when ignited, burned rapidly and left almost no residue. It was a perfect match for the characteristics of the accelerant I suspected had been used on old Betsy. This wasn't some off-the-shelf gasoline. This was something specific, something unusual, something that pointed to a planned, professional-level act of arson. My investigation was progressing, but Brenda wasn't finished. The next morning, I woke up to a new, unsettling sight. My perfectly trimmed front lawn, which had always been a point of pride, was now covered in what looked like industrial-grade weed killer. Large, perfectly circular patches of dead, brown grass marred the otherwise pristine green. It was a deliberate, calculated act of sabotage, clearly intended to destroy my property. And impaled in the center of my lawn, stuck into one of the dead patches, was a small, plastic garden gnome, its cheerful face now somehow menacing, almost as if it was mocking me. The gnome had a tiny, handwritten note tied to its neck with a pink ribbon. It read, "Still not joining? We have plenty more of these." The dead patches of grass, punctuated by that mocking garden gnome, ignited a cold fury within me. This wasn't just about a tractor or a mailbox anymore, this was a war, and Brenda was clearly determined to win it through intimidation and destruction. The gnome, with its sickeningly sweet note, was her declaration. She was getting bolder, more reckless, and that meant she was close to making a bigger mistake. My resolve hardened. I would not back down. The poisoned lawn was a public display of hostility, a clear message to me and, I suspected, to the entire neighborhood, about the consequences of defying the HOA. It was a calculated move designed to isolate me, to turn other residents against me by creating an eyesore that she could then point to as my fault. But her aggression was also a sign of her desperation. She knew I was onto her, and she was trying to force my hand. I decided to address the lawn publicly, but in a way that would turn the tables on Brenda. I called a local landscaping company, not to fix the grass, but to put up a large, professionally printed sign. The sign read, "This lawn was damaged by unknown chemicals. If you have any information, please contact the Oakhaven City Fire Marshal's office. My title, prominently displayed, was a subtle but potent weapon. It was a direct challenge to Brenda, a public declaration that I was not just a homeowner, but a law enforcement official, and that her actions were now falling under official scrutiny. The sign caused a stir. Neighbors stopped to read it, their whispers growing louder. I saw Brenda herself drive by, her face a mask of shocked disbelief as she spotted the sign. Her perfect composure seemed to crack, if only for a moment. This was exactly what I wanted. I needed her to feel the pressure, to understand that her actions had consequences far beyond the HOA bylaws. My next step was to visit the city planning department. I meticulously reviewed the original blueprints and zoning laws for Oakhaven. I was looking for any obscure regulations, any technicalities that Brenda and the HOA might have overlooked or, more likely, deliberately ignored. I spent hours poring over dusty maps and thick binders. Most HOAs operate with a certain degree of autonomy, but they are still subject to city and state laws. I was confident I could find something. And I did. Tucked away in an old zoning ordinance, I found a clause about community improvement projects that required a special permit from the city, particularly if they involved altering public easements or significant landscaping changes that affected multiple properties. The HOA's widespread aesthetic renovations, from the standard mailboxes to the coordinated shrubbery, were all technically community improvement projects. And I couldn't find a single record of them having applied for, or received, these permits. This was a significant violation, a legal loophole that could undermine the very foundation of Brenda's authority. While I was digging into the legalities, a less extreme event occurred that provided another piece of the puzzle. My mailbox, the ornate cast-iron one, had a small, almost invisible camera placed inside it, angled to capture anyone approaching my property. It was a personal security measure I'd installed after the first mailbox disappearance. One evening, as dusk settled, the camera captured a grainy but clear image of Brenda, wearing dark clothing, approaching my mailbox. She wasn't just walking by, she was holding a small, discreet device in her hand. My heart pounded as I watched the footage. She stood there for a moment, her eyes darting around, then she used the device to spray something quick and low around the base of my mailbox. Then she quickly disappeared back into the shadows. The footage was dark, but the intent was clear. She was either tampering with the mailbox again or, more likely, applying something to the base of it to deter me. This added to her pattern of harassment and provided a direct visual link to her actions. The next day, feeling empowered by the permit discovery and the surveillance footage, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. I hadn't joined, so technically I wasn't allowed, but I walked in with an air of quiet authority that dared anyone to challenge me. Brenda was at the podium, her usual smug self, droning on about community harmony and shared responsibility. When she opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. "Yes, Alex?" she said, her voice tight, clearly surprised by my presence. "Brenda," I began, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the murmuring. "I have a question regarding the permits for the various community improvement projects undertaken by the HOA. Specifically, the landscaping uniformity and the mailbox standardization. Could you confirm that the HOA has obtained all the necessary city permits for these projects, as required by City Ordinance 214? B. Subsection 7, regarding alterations to public easements?" A hush fell over the room. Faces turned from me to Brenda, then back again. Brenda's carefully constructed facade shattered. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an escape. She stammered, "Well, Alex, those are internal HOA matters. Not something we discuss in an open forum." "On the contrary, Brenda," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "City ordinances are public record, and as a resident of Oakhaven, I have a right to know if my property, and that of my neighbors, is being affected by projects that may not be legally sanctioned. I paused, letting my words sink in. Furthermore, I'm curious about the HOA's policy on personal property damage and harassment. For example, my tractor being set on fire, my mailbox being stolen, and my lawn being deliberately poisoned with chemicals. Are these also internal HOA matters, Brenda? The room erupted into a cacophony of whispers. Accusatory glances were thrown Brenda's way. She was cornered. Her face was a mask of furious indignation, but beneath it, I saw fear. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a new extreme event occurred that shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. The lights in the meeting hall, just like in my house days earlier, flickered violently. Then, the entire building was plunged into darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by shouts of confusion. I heard a distinct, frantic scuffle from the direction of the podium, then a sharp, metallic clang. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the panicked faces, Brenda was gone. The podium was overturned, and lying on the floor next to it, shattered into dozens of pieces, was a small, empty, plastic container. The label on the container was partially ripped, but enough remained for me to read the chilling words: industrial-strength concentrated herbicide. The same type of chemical that had killed my lawn. And Brenda, the HOA president, had just fled the scene like a guilty phantom. The shattered herbicide container on the floor, Brenda's sudden disappearance into the darkness, it was a definitive admission of guilt. The chaotic scene in the meeting hall was the perfect storm, revealing her true nature to the very community she claimed to serve. The fear in the room quickly morphed into angry whispers, then frustrated shouts. They had witnessed her escape, a desperate act from a cornered animal. This was it. The final act in Brenda's reign of terror. The meeting hall buzzed with a mixture of confusion and outrage. People were looking at each other, murmuring, "Did you see that?" and "She just ran." I calmly stepped forward, addressing the bewildered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice cutting through the noise, "it appears our esteemed president has decided to make an unscheduled departure. Given the recent pattern of events, including the damage to my property and the clear evidence we just witnessed, I believe it's time for the Oakhaven HOA to consider new leadership." I then pulled out my phone and dialed the police, speaking clearly for everyone to hear. "Yes, I'd like to report a possible act of arson and ongoing harassment. The suspect is Brenda Sterling, president of the Oakhaven HOA. She just fled an HOA meeting after a power outage, leaving behind evidence of property damage." A collective gasp swept through the room as the word arson hung in the air. The police arrived swiftly, and I provided them with a concise, professional summary of the events, starting with the tractor fire and leading up to Brenda's dramatic exit. I handed them the locket with the soil sample containing the specialized solvent, and explained the findings from my home lab. I also showed them the surveillance footage from my mailbox camera, clearly showing Brenda spraying something at its base. The pieces were all there, meticulously collected and presented. News of Brenda's flight and the accusations against her spread through Oakhaven like wildfire, ironically. The neighborhood, once tightly controlled by Brenda's rules, was now alive with gossip and speculation. Many residents expressed shock, but an equal number admitted to having felt intimidated by her for years. Arthur, the kind old man from whom I'd gathered initial information, approached me the next day, his eyes wide. "I knew she was extreme, Alex, but arson? And a power outage? That's just wild." The police investigation moved quickly, especially with the evidence I provided. They soon discovered that the specialized solvent found in the soil sample was traceable to a local chemical plant where Brenda's estranged brother worked. He had access to it and had been known to supply her with specialty chemicals for her notoriously aggressive gardening. This provided the direct link between Brenda and the accelerant used to burn old Betsy. They also found the specific brand of industrial-strength herbicide from the partially ripped label on the container, confirming it was the same one used to poison my lawn. Brenda, it turned out, had initially tried to hide at a relative's house a few towns over, but the police tracked her down within hours. She was arrested and charged with arson, theft, and multiple counts of criminal mischief. The news sent shockwaves through the local community, making headlines in the Oakhaven Gazette. The HOA Karen set my tractor on fire story was no longer just a rumor, it was a verifiable fact. The biggest revelation came during her interrogation. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, including the melted locket she had vehemently denied owning, Brenda finally broke down. She confessed to everything. She admitted to setting my tractor on fire, driven by a desperate need to make an example of me for not joining the HOA and for defying her authority. She confessed to stealing my mailbox, ordering the landscapers to clear away the accelerant spill, poisoning my lawn, and even cutting my power lines. She believed she was above the law, operating within her own self-made set of rules. Her motive was simple: absolute control. She saw my defiance as a personal affront, a challenge to her power, and she intended to crush it. She never imagined that her defiance would lead her to mess with a city fire marshal, a man whose job was to meticulously investigate the very crimes she committed. In the aftermath, the Oakhaven HOA underwent a dramatic overhaul. Brenda was, of course, removed from her position, and the entire board resigned under pressure from angry residents. A new, more democratic board was elected, promising transparency and a focus on genuine community building rather than oppressive rules. They even offered me a formal apology and contributed to the cost of replacing old Betsy, though I declined the latter. Life in Oakhaven slowly returned to normal, but it was a new normal. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of quiet freedom. My new mailbox, the ornate cast-iron one, became a symbol of resistance and victory. My lawn, though it bore the scars of Brenda's herbicide, was slowly but surely growing back, a testament to resilience. And as for old Betsy, she was replaced by a brand new, even more powerful tractor, one that I nicknamed Phoenix, a symbol of rising from the ashes, stronger than before. I had achieved what I set out to do: bring a bully to justice, not just for myself, but for the entire community. And I had done it by simply being who I was, the fire marshal, a man who always found the source of the flame, no matter how carefully it was hidden.